Hello, I'm Toycat, and to be honest with you, I'm just not really that into sports. I know there's a huge sporting competition happening right now, but I'm just not that into it. The same thrill that most people get from their sports, I would say I get from politics. But the problem with politics on a local or national level is that you have to look into policies and learn about how you're going to impact your country. You can't just say, go team go. But when it comes to international politics, you can just look at another country's politics and go, yeah, go purple team go red team go blue team go. You can pick a side and you can cheer for it all you like, and it's not your problem if they happen to lose or win, and that is why I like to follow so, and 2024 is one of the best years for this. It's a transformative year for the international political scene. There are so many hugely fascinating elections happening this year, and today I wanted to show you 5, except 2 have actually already happened because it took me too long to make this video. So let's start by talking about Mexico's election, which has already happened and led to a huge sweep by the left-wing Marina party. Let's talk about what's happening in South Africa, because the ANC, Nelson Mandela's party, have lost their overall majority for the first time since it existed, since, the country ended that bad thing that happened there. But also we have interesting elections happening in the UK, where we are going through the most interesting, I would say political crisis, but really just political retransformation of the landscape of the country. We also have France, where Macron, the famous centrist president, is being unseated as a party, not just by anyone, but by the far right in the country. And then also, I hear there's a spicy United States presidential election. We rarely get those, especially not for 2 times in a row before this one. So it's going to be very interesting what's happening with all of these elections, and let's talk about precisely that today. And let's not do so from an elementary school that's in the middle of a... it's fascinating. It's in the middle of a highway on-ramp, but let's not do it from there. Let's instead do it from Mexico, because I want to go through this fairly briefly. Mexico is a country that has a fairly obvious problem to most people. I will use the politically correct terminology here. There are people of international crime that do very, very bad things in Mexico, and the biggest problem that many people want to be solved is that you would like it if people weren't committing major, horrific crimes of violence against you. And so I asked my editor Naito to explain to me the big, the polling from the ground in Mexico, because he is from there, and he explained it as so that there are 3 main candidates. There's been a lot of unity from parties that were previously enemies, and there was a third party that was kind of popular. However, interestingly enough, the party which was already in charge had a new leader, Claudia, who said that she wanted abrazos, no balazos, which translates to hug, stop, gunshots, if you say it in correct Spanish at least. And I think what's really beautiful is the fact that somehow that translated well into the country, which is kind of nuts, right? And the actually idea, whether you agree with it or not, is the idea if you just give everyone who's not working or studying a huge amount of money, then those people hopefully won't fall into the cartel's hand. And it seems as though people largely agree with that. It seems as though Mexico has largely said, yeah, okay, we've tried a lot of things. What if we just give people money and beg them not to join the cartel? And hopefully that is what they will do over there. So fingers crossed for Mexico. It was a result which led to, again, it's a landslide of the entire country, and it was a result that was hugely unexpected and really something that leaves a lot of people in shock in that country, and that is something which I think is fascinating. Also, it's the first person of Jewish descent to be elected president of Mexico. Good job, Claudia. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce this last name, but what I am going to attempt to pronounce is, why do I keep ending up back here? I'm going to instead attempt to pronounce South Africa, because it is a country that, the problem in Mexico is widespread and known about in the world, solve the cartels, solve the world. But with South Africa, their biggest problem was already solved. Everyone knows they used to have apartheid, and that is bad. And when they solved apartheid with Nelson Mandela, in the early 90s, everything just went away. All the problems in South Africa have been gone, except that's not the reality on the ground. South Africa is one of the countries with one of the highest emigration rates of people just trying to get out of there desperately. I cannot tell you how many South Africans I know who are desperately leaving and never going back in there. And so one of the big things that is cited is the fact that the country is falling apart. Loads of people think their country is falling apart, but in South Africa, it's in a much truer way. And just as a really tiny aside here, when you go to most countries, when you're saying, oh yeah, I'm about to go to Madrid or Barcelona, which areas of Barcelona should I avoid? It is famous for pickpocketing, right? There's a lot of crime in Barcelona, and so you know which areas you don't go to if you don't want to be pickpocketed. However, when you're going to anywhere in South Africa, when you pick even the most touristy of towns, you don't say, where should I avoid? It's, where can I stay safe? It's, what 7-block area should I not go away from if I don't want to have some genuinely violent crime happen? And that is kind kind of nuts when you think about it, but that is the situation in South Africa. The electricity turns off for huge numbers of hours in a day. Load shedding is a term everyone's familiar with, and so you can't trust the police there, you can't trust the electricity grid, and slowly, one by one, government services seem to be falling apart. And so for the first time ever, this was predicted, but it did happen, the ANC, the African National Congress, the party which has just ruled South Africa since the apartheid ended and black people had the right to vote, which is crazy when you look at how shockingly recent that is. It's a bad thing, but the ANC stopped being the single party in charge because now they only have 40% of the popular vote and only 71 of the seats, which means that they can no longer govern alone. There's been some really interesting coalition talks. They concluded they're going to have a unity government. That was on the 7th of June, and here we are on the 27th of June with South Africa's president hitting out at the coalition party saying, what the heck are you doing, man? Come, make this all work. And basically, long story short, is South Africa is going through a time right now, and the election is basically a representation of the entire country saying, look, you guys literally liberated us, but we're still not going to vote for you in the large enough numbers, which I think is a crazy thing to say. As someone who has been following South African elections for years, you can see that they always just have basically a super majority of the votes, because again, it doesn't take a lot to say that, yeah, actually, Nelson Mandela, I think that his party is the one you'd want to vote for, internationally widely known as the person who did a pretty damn good thing, and that party is going to lose faith, it's going to lose power because people are done with it, which is crazy to say, right? Speaking of things that are crazy to say, let's talk about the other elections now. I'm excited for this one. We'll start with France, because France is obviously going through not a presidential election. Macron, the leader of the country, he is not up for re-election. You don't have to worry, he's not going anywhere, or if you don't like him, you do have to worry, because no matter what, he isn't going anywhere, but instead they're having a legislative election. I want to talk briefly about France's politics, because I think this is fascinating, and hopefully you do too. France has a presidential system. It's actually called like the French Fifth Republic, right? The Fifth French Republic, because they kept on disintegrating and rebuilding their country for fairly, for some of the cases were for fairly valid reasons, but basically they went for a fairly modern-ish system where they have a parliament, they have a prime minister, he is up for election now, as well as a president. In the UK, we have a prime minister and we have a king. Which is, I guess the closest thing we have to a president, a head of state with no powers. But in France, they have a president with powers and a prime minister with separate powers. Kind of like the US with the Speaker of the House, who is way less powerful than the president. France has a more balanced system than one of the UK or of the United States. And they also have a multi-round system so that you can vote whoever you want in the first round, and then the last two candidates go off against each other. It's very fun in that way. But in the French legislative election, in the Fifth Republic, it looks as though the left and the right have kind of united, both trying to squeeze out Macron's party. So the ensemble, as they're called, the coalition, were basically center-ground parties saying both sides are getting this horribly wrong, and that's how Macron came to power. But now the right have come together, the left have come together, and it means that there is expected to be a huge shift. And if you look at opinion polls for this, it's absolutely shocking in my opinion. If you look at opinion polls, you can see that the far-right party, the National Rally, I think far-right sounds like it has some negative connotations, but the party that is the furthest right in the mainstream parties on the spectrum, Le Pen, who lost the last presidential election, is looking to win by not just a little, by a lot. About a third of people are saying, yep, I will vote for Marine Le Pen now. And what I think is funniest about this is the funniest thing about this, in my opinion, is that so France holds on to all of its international territories, and they all get to vote too. So Mayotte is right over here, right? And it's an African island. I don't know how to prove that point to you any more than I can with a single street view. It's an island off the coast of Africa. This African island is one of Marine Le Pen's strongholds, and there's something fun about there. If you want to be one of those people that says well, actually, it's a racist party. It's a racist party that does best in the place that theoretically you'd expect them to be racist against. So maybe that's not a good simplification, or maybe I don't know. Maybe African people are the most racist. It's one of the two things you could take from that. I don't think either is a good one to take away, but what I do think is an interesting takeaway is the fact that France is going to go through some upheaval, and that is going to be interesting. I think so, at least. So that's happening literally in the next few days as I record this video. But you know what else is happening in a few days? The UK's general election. Seriously, the whole Western free world, all the major economies of the world are going through elections pretty soon. We'll come back to the ones that you think I missed if you think there's a technicality in there, but the UK is going through a general election, and this was the 2019 general election, where the Conservative Party came out of being a minority government into being a majority government, whopping the Labour Party down to 202 seats, one of their worst results in quite some time. This is something which was it comes after a long series of different Conservative Prime Ministers winning elections, but basically they've had 5 different Conservative Prime Ministers since the last Labour Prime Minister. And so you might assume, therefore, I guess the country's had enough of that Labour, but in 2024 it's going to go quite differently, at least according to projected opinion polls. So, as a brief guide, this is the seat count right now. 344 for the Conservatives, 205 for Labour, 43 SNP, and then like a small number of seats after that. Like Liberal Democrats on 15, I guess are worth mentioning. Let's go look at the current opinion polls in the UK. As you can see, Labour, after having a high of somewhere close to, well, what is that over here? Like 51%, 52%. They're sitting at about 40 to 44%. It's a very, very high amount. But what's really happened, the story here, is how the Conservatives went from being 50% down to being about 20%. The Conservative Party has absolutely collapsed. Honestly, since they lost their last leader, they had a popular leader that won an election, but he had some parties, and I know he had a party whip that did some bad things, and so as a result, they replaced him with the shortest-lived Prime Minister in UK history. I think she lost against a lettuce, and then as a result, they replaced her with the person that she lost against in the leadership election, and that person is on course to lead the party to one of its worst results in history. In fact, this is so bad. Let me show you something fun. So this is the electoral calculus. This shows you if you give a percentage of if you tell it the percentage of the vote that it's going to have, it'll tell you how many seats it'll win based on adjusting that for all the constituencies. So let's say that they get 20% of the vote compared to Labour's 41%. Let's just say the polls are exactly on, right? Which is, you know, they could be a lot worse than this too. So Liberal Democrats are on 11% and Reform is on 16. So Liberal Democrats on 11.8. They just perfectly match it. But the Reform Party jumped all the way up to 16, and I don't know what the Greens get in this scenario. But then we'll add on Scotland as well, because in Scotland it looks like the SNP are on, I don't even know how you calculate that, but they're on slightly worse than they were before, 31%. So now we can take these numbers and we can predict. Okay, we're gonna just pick a 2%. Sounds good. Now you can see that the Labour Party gained 282 seats, and of the 376 seats the Conservatives have, they lose 323. Do you remember how earlier I was like, oh yeah, it was really, really, really bad in the UK when in 2019 they went down to only having 200 seats. It meant the majority was 165 or 163 or something like that. The highest, one of the highest majorities in a very, very long time. But consider what the majority is going to look like now. If this is anywhere close to true, and I would definitely have a damper on that, you're going to have a Labour Party on 476 seats, and their former opposition being on 53, whereas their new opposition becomes a party with 11%. Because they're very popular in local areas. And the party which gains 16% of the seats will only get 16% of the vote, will get 6 seats. There is some crazy reasons this happen, but basically what basically is happening here is the Conservatives and Reform are both right-wing parties. The Reform gain that has happened here has more or less come exclusively as a loss to that of Conservatives. Obviously some Labour voters have joined in there too. It sounds crazy, but that's how politics works. But as you can see, there has been this huge exodus, and now we have a situation where there are 2 right-wing parties that probably could come together and probably at least come second, but they're both fighting so hard that they're both going to have a horrible, horrible time. Absolutely fascinating. Also, the SNP are going to lose some seats, it looks like, because of how well Labour are doing in Scotland, which means that the UK's, the Scotland part of the UK elections could be very interesting too. Also, what's going on in Northern Ireland is a whole fascinating thing by itself, but I'm just going to talk about the UK more broadly and say we are changing governments, and not by a little, but like flipping the scale. You know, there's this idea of the pendulum shifting. This is the pendulum going dong, dong, right away. No room for middle ground there, and that's kind of wild living in the UK. It's like, you know, usually you feel like it's neck and neck right up to election day, but at this point everyone's being like, so here's our next Prime Minister. The betting odds are like 101 against him. If you bet £100, you get £101 for betting this man will be the next UK Prime Minister, and you get that £1 because he might have a heart attack or die in a car crash or something in the meantime, which I think is absolutely nuts. Speaking of things that are absolutely nuts, have you guys heard about what's happening in the US? it's not going to be that big of a deal, I hear. So instead, let's talk about Canada. Okay, so in 2024, there's going to be elections in all the major economies, right? And I missed out Germany when I said that, but Germany is going through the same thing. In 2021, they made a huge shift and decided they are going to vote for the left-wing SPD, and they became the largest party. But since then, everyone's been like, I miss those, the Christian Union parties. The biggest right-wing party in Germany is a Christian. Don't question it. But anyway, they missed those parties, and they're coming back in a major way. And it's not even because they're like, oh yeah, this is people like the right uniting. In Germany, the right are pretty high, and the far right are also doing pretty damn well. The Alternative for Germany are doing hugely well there too, and that is fascinating. Look at Canada. It's going through something interesting too. So this is Free38 Canada. It's the site I use that shows you the individual breakdown by province, because again, it's a very, very non-federalized country. I really want to talk about Canada and the weird space they're going through of that at some point. But for now, you can see that in every province besides Quebec, because Quebec's always different, in Quebec you can see that it looks like in Quebec, so it looks like the way it's actually going to go is like, oh yeah, they're going to have a very Quebec focused government with maybe the Liberals coming second. In every other province in Canada, the Conservatives are going to win by huge margins. Even the historically super left wing maritime provinces are going blue. And if you look at the polls on this, it's even crazier in my opinion. If you look at it, you can because I saw this recently. I was like, oh, the Liberals aren't doing too bad. They're above the blue and the green and the purple and the yellow. And then it's like, oh, and then there's the blue above them, just so high up there. This is something interesting that has happened in Canada, and it's happened in Germany, and it's happened in the United Kingdom, and it's happening in France. And honestly, this is why if you look at the 2024 election and you say, wow, this guy won this by a pretty substantial amount in terms of electoral vote. It's 5% in the general vote. But you might be thinking, surely the country's not going to go back to a president that they specifically kicked out. But I think there's something interesting happening in the world. So again, here's the actual polls, by the way, from 5. I know this is the weird thing. Americans don't trust opinion polls. They're like, I don't trust a poll that just asks 1,000 people and applies a methodology. I trust speaking to the fellas at the gas station. I don't know why that is. I hope that if you're American watching this video, you do trust polls. And that was an offensive accent applying only to people in your life that don't. I understand that polls were at a couple of times, like they predicted it would be a 1/3 chance of being the blue team and the red team wins anyway. Wow, that's not how chances can work. I kind of understand that, but I think it's fascinating that it is like this. I would have guessed that the gap would be way bigger in one way or the other, but it's neck and neck in the United States. And I think the reason for that is because you would expect it to be that the blue team's winning, because, second-term presidents are a big thing. But all across the Western world, we are seeing the governing party, from the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing the governing parties be trounced. Just look at the SPD in 3rd place right now. Look at the Conservatives, look at the Liberal Party in Canada, looking like if they're really lucky, they might hold on to 2nd place. Look at the Conservatives in the UK getting 3rd place right now, and honestly, it's not going to take too many votes for them to go 4th place, and after that, the SNP can overtake them if they get to 5th. It doesn't take much for the first party in the UK for so long to become the 5th party in the UK. And so many places around the world are going through something similar. It's definitely going to happen on a crazy level in France. So I think the point here is to say that a lot of people think of politics as being an absolute thing. Like, there is one style of policies that works, and you can use those policies, or you can suffer. And that will generally depend on your ideological belt. Maybe you believe that free market capitalism is the only way everything should be done, or the only way that everything should be done is with extreme government interventions, and the government should be telling you what to do in this way and that way. Or maybe the government should tell you what to do here and not there. But everyone has this exact view of the world where they know exactly how to solve things. And when their team starts winning, wherever it is around the world, you'll think like, yeah, this is us. If you love the Conservatives, you're like, they're winning in Canada because Canada has common sense. If you love the idea of left-wing parties, you'll be like, they're winning in the UK because the UK has common sense. If you love the idea of the orange man, he's winning because he has common sense. If you love Biden, most people will vote for him because they have, people pick some dumb stuff like that. What really happens in the world is that after a long enough time of one party being in power, people will lose their love for that. I think one of the things that I've learned from these last few years is, one, whenever something really bad happens, the COVID, lockdowns, inflation, cost of living, all that noise, people will blame it on the government for not solving that, and that's sort of valid, I guess you could say. But I think what it really proves is there is this continual, like, pendulum shifting. I made the comment earlier, and realistically, after enough time of one party in power, people will start to look for alternatives. Because if you believe that your ideology of conservatism, if you believe that your ideology of liberalism, or your ideology of extreme leftism, or whatever you want to call your set of beliefs, if you believe that that ideology will change the country, and then you vote for people, and then it doesn't, you'll just conclude like, well, I guess I need a better party for this. Whereas the people who agree vehemently that it's not, if you are in a conservative country and those policies aren't working, the people who are not conservative will be extra against them. If you're in a liberal country and those liberal policies aren't working, people will believe that maybe you just need some conservatism in there, and this is just something that is an endless flip-flop. But if you want to actually improve a country, in my opinion, all of these elections are interesting to follow, and I'm gonna pick some teams. I'm going to enjoy election night, July the 4th and everything. But don't get me wrong, it's going to be really, really interesting on that level. But at the same time, I think to actually improve a country and look at the best countries in the world that are doing great right now, regardless of all of this, you've got to actually work out that no government can change an entire country in 5 years. It's all about gradual improvements, right? You've got to be realistic and say, unless we find huge natural mineral wealth like they did in Australia and to a lesser extent in Canada, unless you find some huge natural resource wealth, finding an actual better way to govern your country is going to be done small nudges, bit by bit. And maybe that's just what happens when maybe this is, I think what people call it is like you're a centrist dad if you have any policies that aren't, we need to destroy things and turn them back. But maybe that is the real takeaway from this, is that the world is going through huge shifts, and it looks like it's probably going to go back the other way in like another decade or so, and I look forward to making a video then on this channel, because I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, then please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. I use the money to improve the editing. I definitely pay editors and not buy lobster rolls, and I use it exclusively to buy fun drinks and lobster rolls. But if you want to buy me something fun, please do go to Patreon, and you'll see some unique posts and videos there. But otherwise, actually, you can see a video of me eating a lobster roll exclusively for Patreons right now. Real good thing. You might enjoy it, or you might not. Either way, have a good day. I'll see you next time. Bye.